Earlier this year, Monster Hunter Stories 3 released worldwide, and now that I have 60 hours in the game, completed the main story, and I'm just cleaning up the post-game stuff, is this the sequel I wanted? Maybe? Welcome back, Classy Crew, to another stories journal or video or impressions. It's been a while since I've talked about stories, and this franchise is very specific to my Monster Hunter journey because I played Stories 2 when I was really new to the Monster Hunter franchise, and it was a very different experience. Then I played Stories 1, I think only 1 or 2 years ago, which was a blast because now I actually knew what the Monster Hunter franchise was all about. And now Stories 3 is more goodness, more addiction that the Stories franchise can offer. And I'm going to break down everything. I'm not going to be talking about spoilers. We're not going to spoil the story, anything like that. I really just want to share my impression of the game, the characters, the story without spoiling it, and all of the refinements that they've done to the combat, to the world. I really think that this is a very positive step forward for the Stories franchise, even though when I started Stories 3, it wasn't really doing it for me. I was playing, I was like, oh, I don't know. I don't really like the combat. Like, there was so much more to the UI than Stories 1 and 2. At first, that was a turnoff. And then they were just throwing so many mechanics at me, everything from invasive monsters to feral monsters, all these mechanics in like the first act that I was just like, this is too much. And I actually walked away from the game after a couple of hours. And it wasn't until I spoke to a friend and I was like, oh yeah, what do you think of Stories 3? And they said, oh, it's all right. And I've really recently gotten addicted to this habitat restoration mechanic. I was like, wait, what? I hadn't unlocked that in the game yet because I had given up before that. I was like, what habitat restoration? It's like, oh yeah, you know, you can collect monsters and release them into the wild and like raise their levels and stuff. I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. I should probably go check out what that is. And so I went out, progressed through the story a little bit more to actually unlock that mechanic. I was like, ooh, I really like this. So basically you release monsters into the wild that levels up their rank, which means when you get their eggs, you get a better version of the monster. And the whole habitat restoration mechanic gets even more complex the more you dig into it. You can eventually unlock new mutations of monsters, and you can actually start unlocking different elements of that monster by just dropping eggs in, say, like a fire zone. So let's say you had an ice monster and you kept dropping it in a fire habitat. It will eventually potentially be a dual gene elemental monster, or dual elemental monster, sorry, where it has ice and fire abilities. Now, what I really wanted out of a sequel to Stories 1 and 2 was not that much. I didn't have much criticisms of the old game. I really enjoyed the whole mechanic of hunting monsters, having a nice story, having an RPG experience through the Monster Hunter world. So I was quite satisfied. If there was one thing I could have asked for is, where's the switch axe? Where's the charge blade? I want those weapons in my stories, and they're still not there. And I'm like, that's the one thing that I'm gonna dock it a point, because that is the one thing that, as the switch axe player, why can't I have switching weapons? It would be so freaking cool in stories. Instead, in this game, you get 6 weapons. You get your sword and shield and great sword for your slashy weapons. You get your hammer and hunting horn for your blunt weapon, and you have your gun lance and bow for your stabby weapons. It's a good assortment. Like, I stick to, wait, did I do sword and shield? Hang on, I think I'm missing one. Long sword. So I was mostly using the long sword, I was using the hammer for my blunt, and I was using the bow for my stabby. I did not touch gun lance. I do not like hunting horn, and great sword, I was like, we can move away from that for this time. I think I used it in Stories 1. So I want to try something a little bit new there. And then what else we got? I just wanted also more quality of life, and Stories 3 delivers. This game is so polished and so tight to just do the gameplay. Like, it removes so much friction. You can fast travel at any time by pulling up your map and going to a catavan stand or anywhere you want in the world. So that is very helpful. Gene splicing is easier than ever. So before, when you wanted to like take a gene from a monster and put it in your existing monster, you would lose your old monster and then you had to go find a whole other monster. Now it's like you can rip genes out of monsters as much as you want, put them where you want. You don't lose your monster. You can move your genes around. You can search by gene list instead of going monster by monster. It just gene splicing your monsters. There's a proper term for it. What's it called? I forget. It's just way smoother, and it's really come a long way in Stories 3. So I really like what they did there. I'm actually using that mechanic, whereas in Stories 1 and 2, I'm like, this is a pain. I don't grind. But in Stories 3, they've actually made it accessible enough. to make me want to do it. The controls are a lot smoother too, especially it feels more like traditional Monster Hunter. You'll notice when you move your joystick to move your character, there's that like slow, gradual, like leaning into a run, and you can actually hit your joystick to break out into a run. And I went back and I played Stories 1 and 2 just to compare the gameplay, and it's so stiff. Stories 1 is, I mean, the stiffest was a 3DS game. It's just very like you're moving, you're not moving. You can't run. Same with Stories 2. Stories 3, it just, if you're playing Rise World, your character actually controls that way. So I like that. The other thing I wanted out of Stories is they were geared towards, I feel, kids in a way. Your protagonist was a kid. He grew up a little bit in Stories 2. In Stories 3, they're embracing an older, more mature story. Your character is in their late teens, and they're voiced as well. They're no longer a silent protagonist, which I'm usually not in favor for, but they've done it really well this time. I picked English voice acting, and sometimes I find in JRPGs, English voice acting can be pretty cringe. Stories 3 is not that case. All the characters sound really good. Even the characters that I think are supposed to sound annoying. The one character I really don't like hearing about is the old guy in my party. I just don't care for that guy. I don't care for his aesthetic. I don't care for what he's doing. I do like that he loves finding like legendary monsters or whatever. That's the only thing. And I don't like he has a puke. I don't like he's a hunting horn user. Like really, he's got everything going against him. I even forget his name. The other characters though, they're all great. Like I said, main character is good. The setting is great. We're in a world that's set besieged by war, and there's a lot more behind the scenes, but again, I'm not going to expand. For those who have played Stories 1 and 2, it does take place in the same world as those worlds. It takes place 200 years after Stories 2, and there's, as far as I know, very little, there's a few callbacks to some things, which I won't spoil, but you don't need to play Stories 1 or Stories 2 to enjoy Stories 3. It's just a self-contained story within the same world. And because it's 200 years later, I mean, you're not going to really see characters come back from Stories 2. They're probably all dead. Another thing that comes with the gameplay, egg farming. So I have a reputation of just not enjoying grinds in my game. I don't like to grind, and Monster Hunter is a very grind-heavy IP. This is the game that got me to grind eggs because it's just so smooth. All of your egg dens are pretty much, you get in, you get all of the little collectibles around the den, you get your egg, you get out. And the other thing is when you pick up the egg, you no longer have a Naviru going like, oh, this is a stinky egg. Oh, that's a pretty light. I'm like, what does that mean? A stinky light egg? Is that good? Is that bad? And then you have to remember all the patterns of the egg. Is this a flying wyvern? Is this a fanged wyvern? So now you pick up your egg and you see like, they're like, oh, that is a black Diablos egg. No question. You don't have to remember anything. It's like, cool, I got a black Diablos egg. After you learn the monster, the first time you pick up the egg, it'll just say, this is a flying wyvern egg or something. And so you know that you've never collected that egg before, which is great. So you grab that back, and then when you're actually like looking to harvest eggs, you do that. Another thing is some dens give you 2 eggs, and the dens that give you 2 eggs, you can pretty much cycle through all the eggs you want until you finally get the one you want. Like otherwise, in a typical den, you can only do it like 3 to 5 times, and then a monster shows up or you run out of eggs. So all of that makes it super easy to go out in the field, grind out some eggs, hatch them, put them back in habitat restoration, raise the levels, and then you just keep rinsing and repeat until you get the gene combo you want, the monster combo you want. It's super fun. Another thing I really love about the Stories franchise in general is just the fact that it's very addicting to complete things. The little checkboxes and give me little dopamine hits. And once again, we've got a great achievement list in this one that are quite achievable. Like they're not unreasonable, like filling the gene book in Monster Hunter Stories 2. The most unreasonable achievement, and I do hate it in Stories 3, is they expect you to collect all of the cutscenes of all of your monster kinship skills, which means you need to fight with every single monster in the game, and you need to raise their kinship in battle to execute their super move, and that's just not fun. So I don't know why they made that an achievement. It's the one that I'm like, oh, I really don't want to do that. Where was I? I was going off on a tangent about. I really love what they've done with the Monsterpedia here. So it reminds me a lot of the Hunter's notebook from Monster Hunter World, you get all of these like little notes on the ecology of the monster. Pretty much every monster has 2 notes that you have to find. Most of them are by finding tracks in the field. There's other requirements sometimes to unlock them. Some monsters you have to raise their levels to get more info on the book, so or on their entry. So it's really fun to just kind of fill up that book and collect it. And another thing is, I find myself, especially in endgame, referring to my Monsterpedia before going into a fight. I'm like, okay, what is this monster weak to again? And then I look, I'm like, oh, okay, so I should really go in with like a fire build. And then I just like quickly adjust my weapon, armor, and my companions to have a fire build. It's great, I love it. Speaking of companion, that's another thing that's great. So in Stories 1, you were a solo player with your Monstie. And then Stories 2, they're like, here's a companion. And I think you could control the companion if I remember. I could be wrong on that. In Stories 3, I find it's the best of both worlds, where you don't have to worry about your companion at all. They'll do whatever they want. You can eventually, as you unlock their stories, you can switch their weapons, you can switch their Monstie in one other configuration. So it's not overly complex. So the game's like, focus on you, the MC, your side characters, you know, you can just swap it out to what you need for whatever monster you're fighting. And that's just, again, it's just quality of life. It's just so quick to just get what you want. There's no gene book in this one, so you don't have to fill out that crazy book. And then the Poogies are back, so that's always fun. There's not like a Poogie like checklist per se, but there's 100 Poogies in the game, and what I like is on the maps they tell you how many Poogies are left to find on that map. And at one point you'll eventually get a Poogie like radar, which if you're close to a Poogie, you're gonna hear like the little oinky sound. So it helps you kind of fine tune their location. So overall, Stories 3 has just taken like everything from Stories 1 and 2 so far and just made it overall better. I've come to accept that when it comes to the story of the Stories games, or any Monster Hunter game, it's just not what I care about. It's really nice to have a nice like story as a backdrop, but I realize I do not play these games for the story. In terms of the story of Stories 3, it's I'm trying to compare it to 1 and 2, and it's similar in structure. And again, I'm not trying to spoil anything. I think what's more important is the characters. I find the characters were more memorable than the overall story itself. The villains weren't as important, I felt, in Stories 3. The villains didn't leave as much of an impact. And I felt that this was more of a story of a journey to a destination versus like uncovering something deeper. So the story felt linear in that way, but it worked. It was kind of good. It wasn't like, we didn't have a driving force of like, there's this big bad evil that's making problems. Like there is, but there isn't. Like ultimately, it goes back to that whole Monster Hunter trope of the ecology or the ecosystem is out of whack, and we got to figure out why. And then once you figure out why, you solve the problem. And then, you know, it's always with the goal of bringing balance to nature again, which I find is the thematic of Monster Hunter, which I like that. So the companions, you're pretty much always traveling with this group of 5 companions, and all of them are endearing in their own way. Like I really liked, I think the primary companion, which is Eleanor, the princess of the rival kingdom that you meet in the early parts. She's also the cook to your party, and so you're going to be seeing a lot of like little side stories of her wanting to learn how to improve her cooking skills. The little girl who's kind of your like protege, she's a little squeaky, like a little annoying a little bit, but I mean, she's like 12. That's normal for her character. Then you got a cool like ninja dude who's kind of like your silent character who's a little broody and who won't show too much emotion. And then you've got like this really cool character with a tragic backstory who's the lady with the gun lance. Again, she was just really interesting to just discover who she was. Very kind soul, very like tough lady. Just love all the characters. They all play their part. They don't like steal a spotlight. There's more story if the player wants to explore what those stories are. I really highly recommend you play them because it does just make the gameplay better, unlocks more elements to those characters, and all of their side stories are all tied to a very like similar kind of theme, which is also very interesting. So those are essentially like your side quests. I know that might not do the story justice, but that's just how it is. I really play these games for the combat and for checking off things off a checklist and discovering new monsters and just having fun with it, more so than really chasing like a story. I just don't get much out of it. I will say the finale was pretty hype. I got excited. I mean, I can't talk about it too much without spoiling anything, other than it was an emotional high for me. So I really liked how the whole game ended. So otherwise, when it comes to gameplay, I've already talked about the habitat restoration, how much farming is better. The battle UI, I did hate it at first, but it has come around on me, because the reason I didn't like it was like, this is UI overload, which is what I've always accused the Monster Hunter franchise of doing, is they throw too much at you. But after playing the game over and over, I felt that it was just the right amount of info. Like, you can hit the right trigger button, you can see what level the monster is, you can see what they're weak to if you've already fought it before. And so once I've kind of understood how to digest what's on the screen, I'm like, okay, this is all like really valuable info. And actually, when I went back to stories 1 and 2, I'm like, where's all my info? There's not enough info on the screen. So it's funny how like we adapt and learn just to new standards. There's another thing when it comes to endgame. So in the old games, when you reached a certain point, like, the game introduced high rank monsters to the game. This is the first time that they don't do that. And I'm okay with that, because it always felt a bit like a reset in the old world, and it was a callback to the mainline Monster Hunter franchise. It felt a little weird and out of place. I feel that here, the game just naturally progresses the monster's difficulty, and in areas they just naturally get stronger, which is a better alternative, in my opinion, than differentiating between high rank monster and low rank monster. Another thing is, as far as we know, or at the time of this recording, there is no DLC being announced for this game. Like, Stories 2 had what we see in the main line, where there's pretty much like title updates with new monsters and new content. That's not here as far as we can tell. And I love that. I love that when I was picking up the game, I could just play everything that it had to offer. The post game doesn't have one of those dungeons like you find in Stories 1 and 2 that's like a multi-stage dungeon with like all of these extra super hard monsters. Instead, the game throws side quests which has super hard monsters in it, and there's this whole kind of elder dragon element that if you hit a certain criteria, you can unlock a fight with an elder dragon, and there's different elder dragons of different strengths, and fighting them is actually quite challenging. So I have yet to fight one of the final elder dragons because they're just too powerful. They're level 85 and my party's at level 80, and we're getting smoked really easily. So that's kind of what you have to do in the post game. But again, I think it's fine. I've put in 60 hours into this game. I'll probably put in another 20-30 hours, and I'm happy that I can walk away after the game and feel like I've done everything I need to do in the game. It doesn't need to be a game that delivers 500 to 1,000 hours. Like, we got other stuff to do. So love that direction too. But if they do want to come out with like a DLC or an expansion pack, like if they go more with the kind of ice world model to like a world, I would love that. I would absolutely love that. Another thing I find that they've fine-tuned is leveling in this game is super smooth and really easy to just level up your character and your monsters. As I said, I'm at about level 80. It's the highest level I've ever had in a Stories game. I went back to my old save files in Stories 1 and 2, and I think I finished those stories at like level 55 or level 60. I was just really like, it feels like I'm under leveled. But I remember playing Stories 3, and through the whole game, I'm like, why am I leveling up so fast? It's just the way the game is configured. And honestly, it doesn't really make you overpowered. Like, at no point did I feel overpowered in my fights. Actually, that's another thing to talk about. I felt the fights were so much more challenging in Stories 3, and they've changed it where they're leaning more into the Monster Hunter identity than a typical JRPG identity. So every fight is self-contained. Like, all the damage you take in the fight automatically heals after the battle. You regain all your hearts. But the trade-off is now the monsters are more likely to one-hit KO you, and you have 3 hearts, which means if you or your monster get KO'd 3 times, it's game over. So it's now more about preparing for the battle and managing all of your inventory. Another thing is this game is letting you now use all of your inventory, whereas in the older games you had a limited set of items that you could bring into battle. So you have to be a lot more strategic of interrupting the monster with traps or with kinship skills. It does feel more like a traditional Monster Hunter fight where you just need to prepare for the big fights. That's great. One thing that I don't like that they did is they removed flying from the game. Now, from the start of the game, you can glide with your flying monsters, which is a downgrade because in the old games, you could eventually unlock flying and you could go up or down or go anywhere you want. So now it's more limited. I don't know why they chose that. I felt it was pretty fun to be able to fly anywhere I wanted. Now I have to be more strategic in how I like move around. at a minimum, I feel at the end of the game, they should have unlocked flying, or maybe I haven't unlocked it yet or something. But I feel if I could have, I should have unlocked flying by now if it was an unlockable thing. Now, a few other things I want to share when I'm comparing Stories 3 to Stories 1 and 2, some like pros and cons that just don't fit into the rest of my narrative here. Navirou, the icon of Monster Hunter Stories, is no more. I assume he does not live 200 years old. And so he's been completely removed from the game. He's been replaced by your servant Palico, which is clearly a Navirou stand-in, but way less annoying, even though Navirou kind of got a little charming by the end of playing the 2 last games. I didn't miss him in Stories 3. I felt it let the main character and the main story shine more than having this kind of overly loud attempted comic relief of a character. The new Palico, whose name escapes me at the moment, is way more well-positioned as a support character for your main character. Let's see, what else did I have? I think I actually covered most of the other thing. Oh, there's no more mini games. I forget if that was in Stories 2, but I remember in Stories 1, sometimes the monsters will like face off and you have to like slam A bunch of times, or you have to like double tap the buttons, the shoulder buttons to like win something. All of that's been removed. And honestly, I didn't miss it. I completely forgot that was even a thing until I went back to Stories 1. I was like, oh yeah, they used to have mini games in here. So that's been removed out of Stories 3. Again, just part of that whole polish thing. Another thing that I really love that they added in Stories 3 is the fact that on the map, you don't have to enter battles if you're overpowered. A lot of the times you can just attack a monster while riding your Monstie, and if you're high enough level, you'll just kill it and take all the monster parts and the experience, which is fantastic. If you do accidentally get into a battle with one of these low monsters, you can just double click your sticks and it'll just instantly win the battle for you. Another thing is on the field, you can actually, if you have the right monster, you can shoot fireballs and stuff, and you can knock things out of the air, you can break walls. So all of that environmental aspect also feels fantastic and just speeds up everything. Again, removing friction by not wasting your time fighting low rank monsters. That is pretty much everything I wanted to cover about this game. I think Stories 3 takes a really strong step forward for this franchise. I think it's taken everything that they've learned in Stories 1 and 2 and brought it to the next level in Stories 3. They haven't really, dropped the ball on anything. Like, there's nothing that I really miss out of Stories 1 and 2 other than flying. And really, just give me flying in my next stories with the Switch Axe or the Charge Blade, and just more of this with characters in late teen, early adulthood in this kind of world, and just give me more of that, like, egg hunting, habitat restoration stuff, and I am solid. So if you haven't gone into the Stories franchise, I really recommend picking it up. Play it in order so you can appreciate the increments. Play 1, 2, 3. But if you don't want to do all that and you just want to get into Stories 3, you're not missing out on anything. Stories 3 is a fantastic point to start the game. And you're going to see a lot of familiar monsters from the Wilds universe and Rise Sunbreak. So it's always nice to see kind of the monster roster updated with all these new stories entries. So those are my thoughts on Monster Hunter Stories 3. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and I will see you in the next video. And until next time, keep it classy.